Thank you very much. On behalf of the panel, welcome back to the session. We know how important it is for all of you to interact amongst each other. It's one of the highlights of a conference like this, having the ability to talk about things informally after you hear some of the very provocative comments that we've already heard at the beginning of this conference. I think we're going to continue to hear provocative comments throughout the course of the next day and a half. Let me just introduce this panel in a slightly different way. I am extremely grateful and consider myself very fortunate to have been able to get the agreement in terms of participation of these very accomplished senior C-level executives that are in their own rights dealing with customer interface issues on a day-to-day basis. For this particular panel, what we'd like to do is we'd like to offer up each of our panelists the opportunity to give you a very high-level view of what they're up to, what they're hearing, what they sense, what is basically happening in their neck of the woods. I would like very much to have the opportunity for a great deal of dialogue, so I've asked them to confine their remarks to some very short commentary, which they've all agreed to do. After which, of course, we'll have a hopefully adequate opportunity for audience interaction. You've heard them introduced by name. Let me just simply take this opportunity to indicate that we were going to have Alicia Moy, who's the CEO of Hawaii Gas, as part of this panel. She unfortunately got some very pressing issues that she needs to take care of back at the office. So she's very capably represented, as is Hawaii Gas, by their Senior Vice President for Business Development and Corporate Affairs. So Joe Boyven, thank you very much for stepping in at the very last moment.
You're welcome.
We're going to go just in order of how you see the panel organized here, which happens to be alphabetically. So there are no favorites that we're playing as part of this panel. And so why don't we start things off with Jim Alberts, who's the Senior Vice President at Hawaiian Electric.
All right, thank you, Maurice. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, but it did cause me a flashback from the second grade that everything in the second grade was alphabetical order. All right, so I thought I would start out with a perspective first, and this is my own view. After sitting and listening today, I think this, to me, even is more relevant. But my perspective is that, let's see if I can get the slide to move.
You have to wait until your slides go on.
All right. There we go. All right, so I wrote down some thoughts about perspective, and I think these are even more relevant after listening to some of the comments today. If we think about our mainstream customers, people that we all know, it's our family members, people we trade stories with all the time, we really have to collaborate more. I think our view is that we have much more in common and much more in agreement than disagreement. So if we start with that and we work from that, I think it's a much more productive discussion. If you look at that list of things, lower bills, more renewables, resiliency, choice, those are all things we've heard every party talk about and want to have as a goal for our community. We believe in those things too, and we know that that's what our customers want, which is why we're laser-like focused on those issues. Part of the dilemma comes from the major drivers that sit around those issues are all moving at a different pace. Today, for example, technology is moving at a very fast pace. But the other components like the markets, grid modernization, the expectations customers have, and it's, by the way, customers have very different expectations depending on who you're talking to. How do we keep these things moving together as a system so that it can be productive? Because if any one of those components gets too far out in front of the other, it tends to cause that friction. So if we can collaborate together and focus on these issues and keep a system view in mind, I think it'll be a much more productive discussion. So as I think about the customer-focused strategy, a couple of thoughts. The challenges in the customer-focused strategy are all around the transition, because a customer-focused strategy is the right thing to do. It's important for our customers, important for our community, and it's important for our future. So the challenges that I'd like to raise today, and these are more questions than issues, as we create more segments, who's really accountable to customers for outcomes? And I tend to think of the software business as an analogy there. Today, when I call somebody and ask about my software problems, they say, well, that's your operating system, not your application. So then you call the application company and they say, oops, that's your operating system. So electricity is such an essential service that we want to make sure that we protect customer interests in the end, and that we keep that in mind in terms of safety and resiliency and reliability. And as we work through these transitions, the investment cycles and the technology may not match. And I'll give you a good recent example. As we work through inverter standard changes here in Hawaii, some of the older inverters may not be able to match the requirements that are needed in the future for an interactive grid. So how do we resolve those issues? And what happens to the people that are in that group that have this set of inverters that may not be able now to participate in this market space? In terms of diversity, I think we have to think about risk management. So today we're pretty heavily leveraged in terms of rooftop PV, but if we really seek to optimize that in different ways, I think it could help the whole community. And the last one's probably the biggest challenge that I see when I talk to people around town, is this notion of fairness and sustainability while preserving choice. Because we have to look at individual needs and how do we weigh that against the needs of the whole, and how do we strike that right balance, because we want to provide people choice, but it shouldn't be a choice at the expense of other people. Now the opportunities are pretty endless, but I've listed a few of them here. So the optimization of resources as a system, not for each part, to get the best total cost. And a question I've had with a couple of customers lately, we asked this question, or they asked this question: how much generation can I have, when they're talking about PV? And the response that I often give them is, how much do you need? Not how much can you have? Because as we think down the road in the future, today that might be a view, but in the future when you start adding demand response, batteries, storage, and other options, may not need quite as much. So how do we optimize that as a whole system instead of just thinking about one perspective? We've heard a lot today about greater transparency and engagement. The feedback and the market signals are critically important, and I think investments in the smart grid and smart meters will enable that to happen. And that way people will see that direct link between behavior changes and when the pricing signals give them that reward. Now the technology also creates segmentation options, and I think the thing I really like about that is it creates a culture of innovation. Because with this new information and with this new data, people really start to look at what differences they can make, not just from a customer view, but internally. Our own teams inside of Hawaiian Electric really want to find ways to innovate and improve on behalf of customers. So with those things coming together and the fact we're collaborating, that makes all the difference in the world. And then the connecting the right solutions to problems. Today we've got a lot of good examples, and I've listed a few. The Energy Accelerator, GEMS, and on-bill financing. Because this collaboration goes beyond just the hardware that sits on somebody's house, the financing options that it takes to make this happen, things that go on people's bills, and the fact that we collaborate together with other agencies to make that work. I think those are all important tools, and we still have to come back to think about this as an entire system. So when I look at this list and I think about our transformation inside of Hawaiian Electric, I mean, we're very dedicated and committed to that transformation to enable a customer-focused strategy and to provide those choices and options that people want. And you heard a lot from Alan Oshima this morning about our transformation, but I encourage you, if you have not heard about it, go to our website and you can learn more about that as well. And then as a final thought, I think for all of us, we have to keep bringing this discussion back to how, when, and why these changes help all customers and our community as a whole. Sustainability is really critical in terms of how we look at the future, because the investment cycles that we place money into are for the long haul. Even if we build a power plant, it's a long investment cycle, but that PV system on a roof is a power plant too. and people are oftentimes signing up 20-year contracts for those. So we have to think about how this all fits into the future. And it comes back to that cycle of change with technology. Technology is changing so fast, and it's creating all of these opportunities. So we have to be able to move in a prudent way and make sure that we're not taking on too much risk, because electricity is a precious thing. It enables everything in our community. So with that, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Offering a different perspective is Joe Boylan from Hawaii Gas. Let's not forget that when we talk about getting to 100% renewable energy, let me emphasize the word energy there. It's not necessarily only electricity. And so, with respect to the energy makeup in these islands, besides electricity, there of course is a major segment that's used for transportation, industrial uses, and other uses of that sort. The gas company is a very important player in this scheme of things as to how we move forward in the future. And Joe will offer his comments about what they're seeing in the marketplace right now.
Thank you very much, Maurice, and thank you for having us here. Let me start off with kind of speaking extemporaneously here. I prepared some very nice answers to the questions Maurice posed to us, and then realized that was after we had a moment to tell each of us to tell you about our company. So let me just provide some background. We are roughly the size of Kauai Islands Utility Cooperative, and we sell a propane product on all of the neighbor islands, and we sell a synthetic natural gas that's oil-derived on the island of Oahu. And to put the amount of energy that we provide to the state into perspective, if we weren't here, if we were not here and we had to replace what we do for cooking and hot water heating and aggregate drying and all the other uses, we would need to bring in somewhere around 2.5 million more barrels of oil a year. So the fact that gas energy is so energy efficient, provides the state an overwhelming amount of savings just by the fact that we are the gas company. Our products are primarily used for cooking, heating, drying, some transportation, aggregate seed drying, or agricultural seed drying, aggregate drying for roadways, and so forth. So a lot of uses to gas energy on every island. And when you look around, every major restaurant, every hotel, hospital, most state and federal facilities are all gas company customers. So it's a very pervasive product that serves our state. It's interesting in the past few years that we've had an increasing number of inquiries from our customers. And the inquiries are basically asking, are there any technologies that you could help us implement that would lower our cost and increase our reliability? Because next to labor, energy costs are the highest cost within the P&L for the majority of our companies in the state. And although we've not acted on that kind of broader energy solution provisioning yet in the state, customers are moving forward on their own. They are implementing energy solutions in their hotels, in their hospitals, in other establishments to do exactly that, to lower their cost and increase reliability. Some of these are grid connected, some of these are grid disconnected. But the fact that these projects are moving forward without our involvement tells us that there is indeed a major shift happening out there in the customer market, and their needs have changed. And we need to figure out a way to develop an appropriate response to that change in demand, and figure out how to do that over the coming years. So that's, I think, a very interesting change that I've certainly seen in the past few years. In terms of challenges for our business, and to some extent some of the other energy providers in Hawaii, we are all linked to the imported barrel of oil. Right, 55 million barrels per year. They come into 2 refineries through offshore moorings, and then are cracked into the slate of products that we require in the state. But we only need to look back at the past few years to get a bit of an understanding as to what we might be faced with going forward. Several years ago, the old Tesoro refinery was put up for sale, was ultimately purchased by Par Petroleum, but not before it shut down for 30 days and stopped cracking crude. Now, that was our single source of supply. So that calls into question the long-term viability of our existing source of fossil fuels, which, in my opinion, we're going to need for the foreseeable future. The Chevron refinery is currently up for sale. Both of these refineries are operating in an environment with declining demand due to the clean energy initiatives and energy efficiency programs that we've implemented. So those are good things. But since 2009, we've experienced about a 20% decline in the demand for those products. So they're operating in a market of declining demand. And if we continue to implement more and more clean energy programs, then that demand should continue to decline. So a couple of years ago, the state launched the Refinery Task Force, produced 3 series of excellent reports that highlighted a number of these issues. And I think we all need to be aware that those refineries and the pipeline distribution systems are what hold this state together today and provide our reliable source of energy. So it's an extremely important part of our energy ecosystem, our total energy system, that needs to be included in these discussions as we go forward. As part of that issue facing our business, we began to look at fuel supply diversification. It's like a financial portfolio. If we have a single stock in our portfolio, and as that stock goes, so grows our portfolio, we have no diversification, likewise, with our oil products in this state. We need to start looking at how to diversify that fuel source so that any one movement in a single source doesn't have so large of an impact on our customer bills, because right now we are very much linked to the price of oil. As it goes, so goes our customer bills. Because as a utility, we pass through that cost 100% to the customer. We don't keep any of it. So that's because of that issue and that need to diversify fuel supply, we started looking into a small-scale liquefied natural gas program to strengthen our own business and ensure that we have a reliable supply of energy. So in April of last year, we brought in the first shipment of liquefied natural gas to the state in what's called an ISO LNG container. And that operation has been going on since that time and has proven to be very reliable and very cost-effective. I think, let me finish up with going forward. I think one of the most important things we can do for our customers going forward is to implement as soon as possible cost reduction programs. Identify those things that we can implement in the next year, 2, 3, 4, next 5 years to absolutely put downward pressure on our cost of energy in Hawaii. It's extremely important that we remain competitive on the global stage. It's extremely important that we keep the cost of living low enough for all of us who live here, all the folks that want to visit here. And because at some point, if energy becomes too expensive, the typical family of 4 from California can no longer afford to bring their family. And one of the strong pillars of our economy in Hawaii is tourism. So I think energy is just a tremendously important topic for all of us. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you very much, Joe. Our next panelist will offer an even slightly different perspective from his business with Siemens. John Cooper is responsible for programs involving infrastructure and business innovation. I've looked at his detailed resume and I'm thoroughly impressed by the accolades that the industry has provided or bestowed upon Mr. Cooper. So much so that I'm going to give him another moniker, Mr. Smart Grid within Siemens. He has touched businesses and business transformation issues across the country. And he is able to bring to us a perspective that he's gained in dealing with utilities in, many, many states across the country. And so we're looking forward to what you can offer to what you're observing as being part of the discussion that's going on here in Hawaii. John?
Thank you very much. And I'm sort of a surprise guest. I received a call about a week ago, and I'm thrilled to be here. This has been a fantastic experience so far. I'm from Austin, Texas, and a little bit like Forrest Gump, I was in the right place at the right time about 12, 13 years ago when Austin Energy had a new CIO, and I was brought in as a change consultant to look at broadband when it was new. And as it turned out, that began a process, and we built what may be the first smart grid in North America. I resist claiming that, but it was certainly one of the first smart grids. And in that time, I was inside Austin Energy for about a year working with the managers and got to know the utility culture well from a different perspective. I'd started my career at a utility, a very innovative utility, about 20 years ago. As I looked at this combination of communications and energy, I was also experiencing at Austin Energy the difficulty of moving a utility through a transformation. And we didn't call it that back then. It was a consulting arrangement. But I went on to do communications and smart city work with Wi-Fi. And in '08, I got back to energy, and I started doing distributed energy consulting projects. And in 2009, I was asked to come back to Austin Energy. We had a very innovative project called the Pecan Street Project, where we looked at, we called it designing an energy internet. So we sort of redesigned what the distribution utility would look like when it has to deal with all these distributed energy elements. And over the course of time, I've done a lot of other innovative projects. And I was an anchor at Turkey and got exposed to Siemens. And Siemens asked me to come up to New Brunswick, where I was inside another utility for a year going through a transformation. So I'm going to open by asking for some sympathy for your utility. You guys, this utility has more challenges than any other utility, I think, on the planet. And sometimes that's overlooked, the complexity. So what I'd like to talk about today is the customer, and I'd like to get a little more granular. We're all about the customer in these 2 days. And I'd like to talk specifically about what I call a consumer maturity model. We wrote a book about what we did at Austin Energy and about smart grid called the Advanced Smart Grid, and the second edition just came out this last week, so there's a shameless plug. It's called the Advanced Smart Grid. If I progress this, will I get a slide? There we go. So what you see here is what we call a maturity model, where the scale on the bottom across the x-axis is time, and maturity level is on the y-axis. And I first pulled this together about 7 years ago, and I revised it a couple of years ago when I was up in Canada. And the way to look at this is that each state is marked by 2 characteristics. So state 1 would be passive and unaware. And I call that the unconscious consumer. And I have this word of caution when I hear about all the things the consumer is going to do and everything, when most people don't think that much about electricity. They're passive, they don't do a lot with it, they turn the lights on, they know where their breaker box is, maybe. They're unaware of what goes into it. They really don't want to know. And I would draw a comparison to when the internet was new. We had a lot of talk about what was it and a lot of education about the internet and how it worked. But the excitement really started to happen with the World Wide Web and with websites like eBay and Amazon and so on, when you could actually get services across it. So consumers don't care that much about the grid is one of our challenges, although it's essential to them for their modern lives. And so part of the orientation, and so in this, the yellow block with the arrow is the state or the tag of the consumer, and the lighter yellow is the messaging for the utility. And this is one of the challenges of the utility, is each consumer is moving through some version of this model on their own pace. And if you go all the way to the top, this is what I call a networking prosumer. They're united and committed, and they're basically a peer with the utility. They have their own power plant. They're networked and aggregated within their community. But at each step along the way, they go to the second state when they start to awaken, and they have gone through some orientations. Maybe they went through that survey that we saw about. That was a great survey. And they're now passive still, but they're aware. So they're awakening. They haven't done anything. And then in stage 3, they're active and aware. Maybe this is getting a smart thermostat. Maybe it's buying some LED light bulbs. They've taken some action. And now they're starting to gain some skills, typically with conservation, so I have the DR there for demand response. And now we might call them a conserving customer, and they're starting to think about investment in a system. And clearly down here in Maui, in Hawaii, you have a very mature market. So you have a lot of people that have made the decision, have moved up this path to invest in energy. And so part of the challenge for us, as we talk about the customer, is to understand, as I think the gentleman from Honeywell showed, that we can segment customers on attitude, and we can segment customers on demographics and income. But we also need to segment them on how much they know about energy and how much they want to know, right? Where are they? Because at each state in this maturity model, there's going to be a different message to communicate to them. At first, the utility may want to educate them, but if they're way along, they don't need educating anymore. They want opportunities to experiment. So now maybe they want to participate in pilots. And then they want opportunities to actually do something, and they want the utility to help them. And it's not just the utility. Understand we're going to have third parties like SolarCity and others that are coming in that can provide these same sort of services. And this is the creation of a market. So I wanted to encourage this sort of structured thinking as we think about the customer is, keep in mind we're moving from a 100-year-old culture that had a residential rate class, that had a single rate, and the consumers were really assigned a meter account number, a billing account number, and that's how they were looked at. And now the utility is aware that we're moving into a much more complicated environment, but we don't have the tools in place yet. And so it's going to take some time to move from 100 years of one model into a new model. Now, it gets more complicated, so bear with me. And I'm a little bit of a professor, so I'm going to show you another model that I created a couple years ago. And this brings in the idea that we're in a very dynamic state. And what I'd like to suggest there, I think Jim just referred to it earlier, is we're all being acted upon by technology. Technology is changing our lives, and I no sooner get used to my iPhone than I find out my iPhone 4 won't upgrade or won't back up. And I've got to move on to an iPhone 6 or whatever. And I go, I just got this thing. And so the pace of change is real frustrating for me. But we're all dealing with this. It's called disruptive innovation. There's a new change coming about, it seems like, every month. And so I put together what I call the innovation cycle. And in general terms, you don't have to read the small print, but essentially it's a cycle. It goes around because when we have to change, we have to go through this first phase in red, which I would call grief. Maybe you guys are familiar with the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross work in the 50s about terminal diagnoses and patients that find out they've got 2 months left to live. She documented that they go through these 5 stages, and it's been very, it's commonly circulated now. But what's interesting is it's not just terminal diagnoses that give us the grief. It's getting rid of any habit, any change in our lives. And I ask you, do you experience this? You go through it, no, I don't have to change. And then you go, well, why do I have to change? And then you go through some blame. I wouldn't have to change if it weren't for so-and-so. And then you go through depression, I guess I'm going to have to change. And then finally you get to acceptance. That's often how it's presented, but what comes after that? You just had your paradigm ripped away from you. You're like a little kid, right? You're a blank slate, and you're zealous. You got on the internet, and you do some Googling, and you find out what else is out there. You need a new paradigm, right? And so I call this the mastery cycle in green. And I would apply this to individuals. So it's not just the static graph that I showed previously. It's cyclical, right? And you go through orientation, you learn, you're in a learning phase, and then you go through what I would call the ugly duck or the awkward stage. And then you start to gain skills. And then the irony here is you start to get good and you're entering mastery and you really start to be the master of your domain and innovate. You hit stage 12 there, and it's this uneasiness of, oh no, here we go again. I've invested all this time and effort and money in gaining this new skill, and now it's being obsoleted by technology, and I have to change again. And so we're in this highly dynamic environment, and the utility is trying to deal with this at multiple levels, right? We're trying to apply technology to grid modernization, and we're trying to also apply and deal with technology on the customer side. And we're dealing with, a widely diversifying customer class without the resources of a marketing company like Google or Amazon. The utilities often they don't get money in their budget for marketing. They're told, well, you don't need to do that, you're a monopoly. And so now they have to develop these skill sets, probably work with third parties. And so I guess the message I would have for all of us is a little bit like Jim. I might restate it a little bit and say, can we all just get along? We have to go through this together. The utilities need the customers desperately. The customers need the utility. They're going to need this infrastructure for a long time. We've paid for it. It's not going away. We're going to need it. And the system is likely to be a hybrid of on-site energy and grid-delivered energy and energy that we don't use or negawatts efficiency. And so as we move into this new realm, it's going to be new for all of us. And I'd suggest it would help to have a voyage of an attitude of discovery and excitement and curiosity, and I hope a little bit less blaming, because then we're stuck in one of those red squares. That's it.
Thanks, John. Adding a fourth dimension to our conversation here at the table is one of our energy accelerator companies. Yay! Tad Gauthier is the vice president at a company called STEM Inc., one of our energy accelerator companies. And he will offer some, I think, fairly interesting perspectives about how he, representing a startup entrepreneurial company, is addressing square on, or head on, the challenges that are faced by some of the customer interfaces that he's come across, in so-called this energy space. And so perhaps he might give us some insights into what we can expect in terms of the brave new future world of energy delivery and services.
Aloha, thank you. That's a tall order, and I'll see what I can do to live up to that. And thank you for having me on the panel. It's an honor to be up here with the other group of panelists. So STEM is a Silicon Valley-based technology company. We were founded in 2009. And in 2013, I met one of the Energy Accelerator folks who said, "Are you planning on doing any work in Hawaii?" And we said, "Yeah, in a few years, but we're focused in California right now." And they said, "Well, what if we gave you a grant? Would you come out here sooner?" So I led a team that structured a project to enter the Hawaii market, and we said, yeah, we do want to do that. We really want to do it in partnership with the utility, and if we can't get a partnership set up like that, then we're not coming. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes about kind of what STEM is as a company and what we do, but I also want to talk about that partnership because it's fundamental to why we're here as a company. And wanted to take that moment as well to acknowledge the accelerator for their support in helping us bring this technology here sooner than we otherwise would have. So STEM is not a battery company. We build products based on batteries that we get from large manufacturers of batteries: Panasonic, Samsung, Chinese companies. I mean, Tesla, when the Gigafactory gets built, will use their batteries. Battery factories are enormous and massive capital investments. So we design products based on those batteries. We operate those products as efficiently as we can to create value. And our internal motto is kind of more brains, less battery. So we try to be the smarts on top of the battery and do as much as we possibly can with a given battery. That was one of our systems in the background of that shot. I'll kind of show it to you in a vacuum here so that you can get a sense a little bit better of what you're looking at. The tower in the background there is about 6.5 feet tall. It's about the size of a gym locker. That's our standard battery tower. We've got a couple of different versions of that now, but that's our first one that we released in 2012. And this is about a 20 kilowatt hour battery tower. It is also a 20 kilowatt, 18 kilowatt tower. It's UL approved and modular, so when we need more of them for a larger facility, we just string them up in series. The smaller box sitting next to it is about the size of a shoebox. That's something called the power monitor. And the power monitor is the communications and control for the system. That's got a little cell phone, sort of data card in it that can make a phone call, but it also is just connected to the customer's internet typically. And we're always making decisions on that computer in there about what the battery system should do. So there's a local control computer that manages the system. But that communications link is really important because that device can also get a signal from the cloud, and ultimately that signal may come from the utility about something that's going on the grid. The third and final piece is the software view that you see in the front, and I want to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, but that is really the customer's only interface to the system. When you look at a battery tower, there's no dials or buttons on it. There's nothing that the customer goes up and adjusts on that battery box. That's a gray box that goes in their electrical room. Their interface to the system is just through the software they can log into that software and they can see in really high resolution what their load is doing, what their solar is producing, if they have solar, and they can also see what their battery system is doing. And so that's an important piece of kind of customer engagement for us. And the one thing I'll say about that battery tower is it does not do backup power. That's something that adds a lot of cost to the folks that did the survey earlier. The 93% of respondents had said that cost reduction was their #1 priority. That certainly is what we see when we talk to customers. So we designed a product that is meant to help avoid costs. And what we do is called peak shaving. So if you look at this software view there on the right side of the screen, you can see a load curve for one of our sites. This is a commercial site that is closed at night, so you're looking at kind of a midnight to midnight view, and there's not much load. There's a little bit, and then the load, pops up in the daytime when the business is operational. And there's kind of an orange section at the top that's been kind of faded out. That orange section is the activity of the battery that's clipping off the peaks in this customer's load. And by clipping those peaks off, the customer is going to have a lower demand charge. So we're not taking their demand charge down to zero. You physically can't do that, but we're clipping off the top 15, 20%, sometimes 30% of that demand charge. When we think about customer engagement, we really do think about the software as a platform that is a lot more sticky than the gray box that goes in their electrical room that they don't think about. So, we're concerned with keeping our customers involved with us and staying with STEM and not going to a competitor and things like that. And so when we look at the value streams, they're different for every customer. And visualize. We have a customer over on Oahu, Watanabe Floral. They've got solar on their roof, and we were able to put their power monitor in and get them started. And a couple of weeks later, we noticed that, and we've been monitoring, you could see their load and you could see their solar. A few weeks after we put this in, we noticed that their solar wasn't producing anything. And of course, our first thought was, well, is there something wrong with our equipment? And we looked and we said, no, we're getting zeros. It's sending zeros every second. And so we called up the CFO of Watanabe and said, your solar's not on. Did you know that? He said, no, of course it's on. And, he said, well, wait a minute. And he logged in, he looked, and so he looked at our software, and he said, no, it's not. And he went over, and someone had turned it off about 9 days earlier. It took about 9 days for all this to play out, but it was something that he was able to visualize through that software platform. We've got customers that use this visualization ability to move operational processes around, and this is something that can be really useful if we're starting to look at things like time of use rates. Time of use rates can be a really useful tool for getting customers to move things around, but they can kind of feel like they're a club if they aren't introduced with some kind of tools to help them manage around those time of use rates. So we've got a printing press. The guys were coming in and turning on the printing presses at night at 5:45. They were clocking on at 5:30, start turning on all the printing presses 5:45. And at 6 p.m., their demand charge goes way down, and this is in California. They didn't realize what they were doing. We said, move all that back. Don't let them turn the printing presses on until 6 o'clock. And all of a sudden, their demand charge dropped considerably. So those are the kinds of things that the software allows a customer to do. And then, of course, there's control, and the batteries, operate automatically to control the demand charge. But it really is up to the customer's engagement with this software as a platform that can create a much larger lever and create a much stronger bond between the customer and their energy use. They see they see what's happening, and they feel like they can control it. They just get a lot more involved in it. The last piece I want to describe is the project that we structured with Hawaiian Electric, and with the support of the accelerator. We said we want to do a megawatt. We want this to be a large enough project that you can see it. But this megawatt of energy storage will be in 25 different customer locations on the grid. And so each customer will get an average of 2 of those towers that you saw in that picture. Some of them might get 1, some might get 4 or 5. I think 5 or 6 will be the largest that any customer gets. And we have built the aggregation platform to be able to show the Hawaiian Electric system operators what is the capacity of these systems as a whole. They don't want to deal with the complexity of how much is in each one of those systems. They want to see that as a whole. So their system operators will have a screen in their control room that will show, here's your 1 megawatt, here's how much is available. And we make sure that the customers that are using their batteries for peak shaving at any particular moment, that those batteries are not showing up as part of that capacity. The available capacity is seen, and Hawaiian Electric, within 10 seconds, their system operators can push a button and get a reduction of a megawatt on their grid. Or they can take it the other direction, and they can add load, because these are batteries. They can charge up, and they can actually absorb an overproduction scenario on the grid. So this is really meant to be the starting point of something that would be a scalable model, and that will allow competitors to come in and offer, our competitors to come in and offer services and products to customers as well, but using some of the structures that we're putting in place with Hawaiian Electric now on this. And I just wanted to close by mentioning some of the comments around, kind of distributed, around storage, and, storage being expensive, and is storage ready for prime time? And I would agree, pumped storage is a great way to store large amounts of energy. Battery storage has a different role in the grid, and a lot of things that battery storage can do are provide very fast responding services in the distribution, on the distribution system. STEM is lucky to have won an 85 megawatt project in Southern California, Edison, and we're doing 85 megawatts of distributed storage starting in 2016. Building that out, which will take 5 years, but it really is I think a proof point that the distributed storage is kind of, the time has come for it. So.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for your opening comments. As I'm sorting through the questions that are coming from the audience, let me just take this opportunity, using my moderator's prerogative, to just toss out a customer-related question based on the very fascinating charts that John put out there. Basically, what I took away from your charts is that, not all customers are created equal. I mean, there are a whole bunch of different motivations driving customers, a whole different bunch of maturity behind the thinking, and interest from these customers.
Probably around $5.5 billion.
About $5.5 billion is a number he throws out. So now here you have a bunch of energy companies, energy service providers, if you will, trying to become much more adept at being responsible to and responsive to these customer segments. So I want to ask our panelists here, how do you move a company more proactively in that direction to be more responsive to that type of dynamic that's taking place? Let's start with you, Jim.
All right, so my view on that would be to start with a transformation launch, which is what we initiated at Hawaiian Electric. And you have to do that from an employee perspective and a company-wide perspective. And I tend to think of companies differently from people, because the companies are really just a piece of paper filed at the courthouse, but the company lives inside the employees. So getting the employees to embrace that change and to make that move is critically important. Now, the piece that I think might be a bit of a challenge is, with electric utilities and other utilities, there's a necessary obligation to serve. And we have to maintain that commitment to customers throughout these transitions. So performing those duties reliably and in a cost-effective way during that transformation is just as important as the transformation itself. As I said in my early comments, I think we all agree on the destination, but it's really about how do we work through this transition, and it's through our people and the strategy that goes with it. So our plan, as I said earlier, Alan talked about it, but it's on our website.
Joe, any comments?
I guess from our perspective, the first step is recognizing that you have an issue, and that manifests itself in customer inquiries and changes in revenue and profitability. So the first step is really recognize that customer demand and customer needs are changing, and you've got to put together an appropriate market response, and that means investing in new technology, investing in people, investing in organizational change, and getting support at all levels of the organization to then move out.
I would go back to the maturity model and suggest that the more informed, activated, mobilized consumers that you have in your territory, in Maui and in Hawaii, the better off you're going to be. There are studies that show that innovation really thrives when you have more and more parties doing things. In the past, we had a monopoly utility that was the energy subject matter expert in our community, and we turned to them for low rates and high reliability, and we'll continue to rely upon that. But now, as we move into this new era, where we have to adapt to all these changes in technology, adapt to climate change restrictions, especially with you guys, move off of fossil fuels to address your high cost of energy, you're really looking for more and more innovation to come into the system. And to expect it all to come from the utility is asking a little too much. So it's up to the utility to open up to innovation from the community, and it's up to the community to step up and offer and take on that responsibility and not act passively, but to step up and offer ideas. And I think what's really fascinating when I work with utilities and with our customers is that we all have what we need. We simply need to harness it. We need to open up, and this is where you talk about collaboration and so on.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I think that, as a technology provider, we're kind of coming at this from a different, how do you crack into a market? The angle that we have chosen is partnership. There certainly is a market for storage that can seem very anti-utility, and there are customers that will respond to that message. We believe that's not the long-term strategy for success. The long-term strategy for success is figuring out how do we get the customers and the utility to work together, and how do we make ourselves a facilitator in that, and we'll have a long-term role as a part of the system solution in that way.
Okay. There are a bunch of questions that I've gotten here that I've grouped into a number of different areas, so I apologize in advance if I don't specifically ask the question as you have written it, but I'm going to try to generically lump these in several different categories. First has to do with the interface between what you as a business want to do, as well as, since this is obviously, at least in Hawaii, in most cases, it's a vertically integrated, regulatory-driven model. No matter how adept you want your business to be at all, it's very much contingent on whether or not, the regular framework and the umbrella that surrounds how you manage your business is adept and allows you to be adept as well. So do you have any comments? Do each of you have any comments about what you think needs to happen along the way with respect to our ability to address this needed interface between what is happening on the business side, what you're trying to deliver best for your customers, and how the institutional framework needs to move along in such a way as well?
I'll take a stab at it. I think that in every community, the utility is a central figure in the utility because it provides this essential commodity of electricity. But then there are multiple other groups within the community, and the business community is part of that. And as we get more and more modular with our forms of energy, the opportunities for these other players to step up are there. Now, what stands in the way? We have older rules associated with the regulatory commissions. They're trying to adapt as well as a stakeholder. And often utilities are limited in the amount of innovation and risks they're allowed to take. And I think one avenue, we've heard it discussed on some other panels, is rates. Rates have the opportunity to combine with, say, the hardware like your company provides, Tad, in a new type of creative service. And here's the utility working with a creative rate. And now you have this combination of maybe solar or storage or some, just think of all the combinations of the different technologies that we could have now combined with a specific rate directed at the type of behavior we want for a certain segment of the business community or the residential community. So we really are moving into more of a world that looks like what we have with the apps on this phone. It's not apps that will allow you to check your water heater temperature or anything. It's moving into a platform and a system of services that provide this, ever-growing number of personalized services associated with energy.
We have a couple of folks representing the regulated industries here. I mean, I don't want to put you too much on a limb, but do you have any Do you have any insights or perspectives that, you'd like to offer up with respect to this interface?
I mean, my personal observation is that we can, as a community, help that process a lot by finding common alignment and presenting ourselves in that way. And if we're able to do that, we can significantly speed up the process, because if we do have very different opinions, and sometimes it does turn into a legal looking like process, it just takes a long time. And what I hear most from customers is their frustration with that their expectation is that we work through this process as quickly as we can and we find ways to work together. And if we're able to do that, then I think we can meet those customer expectations, because those expectations are being shaped by things far outside our business. You go in and you shop anywhere, your expectations are pretty immediate. So I think that's going to continue to come faster and faster. But I think it's up to us as a community to find the alignment and make that work.
Anything to add, John?
No, I think that's well said.
Thank you. Besides the regulatory interface, there's a bunch of questions that have to do with risk management from a variety of perspectives. Risks around the individual technologies themselves, risks with respect to having to make long-term investments in fairly major infrastructure projects. LNG is brought up in a number of questions. I'm going to throw in, this conversation that we seem to continue to have about undersea cable connections as well. With all the dynamics that are taking place within the marketplace, it would seem to me that a resilient move toward a future, it has to really take into consideration whether or not where you want to be if you're stuck with major infrastructure investments as part of that process. So share some perspectives, if you will, regarding how do you make that balance? How do you make that balance? Obviously, there are some real strong drivers leading to major infrastructure investments that are necessary, but at the same time, it's a changing world. We've all come to agree with that. So how do we maintain that type of a balance?
I can speak from my perspective, which would be largely towards a larger scale natural gas program, and I think one of the first things to look at is, there are ways to implement these sorts of projects such that there are no stranded assets, but yet the benefits to the customers are tremendous over a fairly short period of time. It's a bit of some of the numbers you hear about needing to be invested to bring natural gas to the state of Hawaii are overreaching substantially. And I can't get into specifics about our program today, but I do hope that we'll be able to do that in the coming weeks and months. We did receive bids at the end of February from more global oil and gas providers than we had hoped, so it was a very pleasant surprise. But the cost to do something like this, amortized over a fairly short period of time, like 15 years, is a tremendously small part of the overall cost equation. And this really gets back to my comment at the beginning. Everything or majority of what we pay for in Hawaii is because of the cost of our fuel today. And if we can reduce that cost by 25, 35, 50%, we're going to be able to pass that savings right through to the end user. And the portion of that bill that's caught up in the capital expenditure side of this infrastructure, which, by the way, is very limited in its environmental impact and very limited in its permanency in the state, is extremely small. So I think that's how you've got to look at it, and that's just how the numbers play out. So the capital side of this is a very small component to the overall cost, with no stranded infrastructure at the end of this period.
I believe I could easily have this panel go on for another hour. I certainly have enjoyed it. I hope you have as well. I've been given the hook. And so would you please join me in thanking our very esteemed panel.